Silence can be louder than shouting when you finally realize someone inside your home is measuring you instead of listening to you. I learned that on an ordinary evening that was supposed to feel warm and familiar, the kind of night people imagine when they say, family is everything. The table was set with plates I had owned for decades, the light above us soft and forgiving, the smell of roasted vegetables still hanging in the air. Nothing looked wrong. That was the most dangerous part. My daughter had moved back in 3 weeks earlier with her husband after what she called a difficult period. Financial strain, bad luck, temporary problems. She spoke carefully, as if the words themselves might break if handled too roughly. I said yes before she finished asking. I am a parent. That instinct never expires. Her husband smiled often. Too often. The kind of smile that appears before the eyes catch up. He complimented the house the first night they arrived, walking slowly through each room as if memorizing angles and distances. At the time, I told myself he was curious, new environment, natural interest. That was my first mistake. Dinner that night began peacefully. My daughter talked about small things, books she wanted to read, plans she had put on hold. I listened and nodded, and enjoyed the sound of her voice filling rooms that had been quiet for too long. Her husband ate quickly, glancing around between bites, as if the conversation itself was only background noise. Halfway through the meal, his questions began. He asked about the locks on the doors, casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. He asked whether I worried about break-ins, whether I kept important documents somewhere safe. My fork paused mid-air. I remember that detail clearly, muscle memory interrupted by instinct. I answered carefully. Short responses, neutral tone. I had learned long ago that people reveal more when you give them less. He nodded as though my answers confirmed something he already believed. Then he asked about a safe. Not directly at first. He circled the idea, mentioned a friend who had lost paperwork in a flood, joked about people who trusted banks too much. His eyes stayed on me the entire time. Not aggressive, not kind, just intent. Measuring. My daughter laughed nervously and tried to steer the conversation away. She always did that when tension crept in, smoothing edges, filling silence. She did not see what I saw. She did not hear the questions underneath the questions. When he finally asked where I kept my most important things, the room felt smaller. I told him everything was organized, that I knew where my things were. That was true. I did not say where. He smiled again, wider this time. Satisfaction flickered and disappeared so quickly, I almost convinced myself it had never been there. The rest of the meal limped forward. Conversation returned to safe territory, but something had shifted. I could feel it in my chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with age. It was the sensation of being observed rather than included. After dinner, my daughter offered to help clean up. Her husband declined for her, placing a hand on her shoulder and guiding her away from the kitchen as if he owned the rhythm of the house already. I washed the dishes alone, listening to their footsteps move upstairs, listening to the way his voice dropped when he spoke to her privately. That night, as I turned off lights and locked doors, I became aware of how predictable my routines were. The same switches, the same order, the same habits built over decades. Habits that once meant stability now felt like vulnerability. I stood in the hallway for a long moment before going to bed, listening to the house settle. Wood contracting, pipes ticking. Familiar sounds, suddenly strange. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being overprotective. that letting suspicion grow would only poison the fragile peace my daughter needed. But as I closed my bedroom door, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The handle felt warmer than it should have. I did not confront anyone. I did not accuse or question. I did not call my daughter back downstairs. Instead, I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, replaying every word from dinner, every glance, every pause. That was the moment I understood something important. Whatever was happening in my house was not accidental, and whatever came next would require patience rather than fear. I did not sleep that night. I rested in fragments, drifting in and out of shallow half-dreams, my body still while my mind stayed alert. Every sound carried weight. Every creak felt deliberate. I listened the way you listen when you sense something has already crossed a line and you are waiting to see how far it will go. Sometime after midnight, the house grew too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet I was used to, but the kind that feels arranged, controlled. I waited until morning to move. When sunlight finally filtered through the curtains, I followed my routine exactly as I always did. Coffee first, bathroom second. No sudden movements. No changes that would suggest suspicion. I wanted whoever was watching to believe nothing had shifted. It was not until I returned to my bedroom after breakfast that I saw it clearly. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The bed was neatly made. My chair sat where it always did. The room carried my scent, my order, my history. But I have lived long enough to know that violation does not announce itself loudly. It whispers. The closet door stood slightly open, just enough to be noticeable to someone who always closed it fully. My dresser drawers sat unevenly, the lines not quite aligned. The second drawer from the top had been pushed in a fraction too far, then pulled back again, as if someone had tried to correct a mistake after realizing it too late. I stood still for a long time, long enough for anger to rise and settle, long enough to let clarity replace emotion. When I opened the drawer, the evidence was undeniable. Papers I kept in strict order had been shuffled, old documents mixed with newer ones, my personal files touched by unfamiliar hands. Someone had searched carefully, but without respect, returning things approximately where they belonged, but not exactly. And the key was gone. It was a small thing, brass, ordinary. I had kept it hidden for years beneath the drawer lining, taped where only someone who knew to look would ever find it. The key had never moved before, not once. I checked again, slowly, methodically, fingers tracing the same path they had followed 1,000 times before. Nothing. The absence hit harder than theft ever could. This was not about money. This was about access. Someone had entered my private space while I slept and removed something essential. Someone who felt entitled to do so. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of that reality settle. Anger came next. Not explosive. Focused. The kind that sharpens rather than blinds. The kind that demands patience. This was not a random intrusion. No burglar would know where to look. No accident could explain the precision. This was premeditated, studied. Someone in my house had crossed from guest to predator. I closed the drawer carefully, restoring it to the exact position I had found it. I adjusted the closet door to its imperfect angle. I left everything as it was. If someone believed their search had gone unnoticed, I needed them to keep believing that. Confrontation now would achieve nothing. Denial would follow. Excuses would pile up. Lies would multiply. And worse, whoever had taken the key would adapt. I was not ready to let that happen. Instead, I observed. Throughout the day, I watched quietly. I noted how my son-in-law avoided my eyes, how his attention drifted upstairs whenever he thought no one noticed. I noticed the way he lingered near doorways, how his questions returned to finances disguised as concern. My daughter noticed nothing. She was relaxed, comfortable, grateful. She trusted him. That trust was being used against both of us. The realization settled heavily in my chest. That night, as the house filled with familiar sounds again, I returned to my bedroom with intention. I did not search wildly. I did not panic. I stood in the center of the room and looked at it the way an outsider might. What would someone else see here? What would they think was valuable? What would they assume I would never notice? That was when I understood the truth. Whoever had entered my room believed I was invisible, old, predictable, forgetful. They believed my age made me harmless. They were wrong. I turned off the light and lay down, my breathing slow and deliberate. My body rested, but my mind was already moving ahead, mapping possibilities, recalling skills I had not needed in years. Something had been taken from me, that much was clear. But something else had been revealed as well. I was no longer reacting to a threat. I was preparing for it. Sleep never truly came. I lay still in the darkness, counting the seconds between sounds, listening to the house breathe around me. Years ago, I had learned the difference between random noise and intentional movement. This was not random. Just before midnight, I heard it. Footsteps, not my daughter's. Hers were light, familiar, unguarded. These were measured, careful. Each step placed with awareness, avoiding the loose board near the stairs, pausing where shadows were deepest. Someone who already knew the house. I did not move. I slowed my breathing, letting it settle into the rhythm of sleep. The performance felt strange, pretending vulnerability when every nerve was awake. But instinct told me to wait. Then came the voice. Low, whispered, confident. A phone call. The sound drifted upward through the quiet, clearer than it should have been. Old houses have ways of carrying secrets whether you want them to or not. Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep. My chest tightened. The familiarity of his voice stripped away any lingering doubt. This was no misunderstanding. I shifted just enough to reach my phone, keeping it hidden beneath the covers. The screen glowed faintly as I opened the recorder. My hands were steady. I had trained myself long ago to remain calm when truth finally showed its face. He spoke freely now, the careful politeness gone. I checked his room. He's got more than I thought. Papers everywhere, statements, accounts. He's sitting on serious money. Each word landed like a weight. He talked about timing, about how easy it would be, about how predictable I was. He laughed quietly, the sound sharp and unpleasant, like metal scraping against glass. Tomorrow night works best. She'll be out. Same thing every week. Gives me a clean window. My daughter's routine. Used as a tool. I felt something cold spread through me. Not fear. Recognition. This was planning. Rehearsed. Detailed. I already grabbed what I needed earlier. Took the key. Old guy keeps everything in the same place. They always do. Always do. The way he said it made my jaw clench. Not just contempt, but certainty. He believed himself smarter, faster, untouchable. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Whoever they were not surprised. This was not a first conversation. I know, but I don't have a choice. The debt's not going away. You don't understand how bad it is. Debt. So that was it. He spoke about numbers then, amounts large enough to make desperation dangerous. He mentioned people who wanted their money back quickly, people who did not wait patiently. His voice tightened, urgency slipping through the confidence. This has to happen now. He won't even notice until we're gone. He's old. He misplaces things. She'll cover for me without even knowing it. My daughter, used as camouflage. The room felt smaller with every word. My thumb hovered over the phone, making sure the recording continued uninterrupted. This was no longer about suspicion or instinct. This was evidence. He ended the call with a quiet laugh, the kind that comes when someone believes the worst part is already behind them. When the line disconnected, I did not move. I waited until I heard his footsteps retreat, until the house returned to its uneasy stillness. Only then did I stop the recording and lock the screen. I stared at the ceiling, my heart beating slow and heavy. The truth had arrived fully formed. There would be no denial now, no possibility that I had misunderstood. He was not merely curious. He was not careless. He was calculating. And he had underestimated me completely. I thought about my daughter sleeping down the hall, unaware that the man beside her had already decided to sacrifice her trust. I thought about how easily love becomes a weapon when used by the wrong hands. Anger surged, sharp and protective, but I forced it down. Rage makes people sloppy. I had just been given a gift more valuable than anything in my safe. Time. He believed he had until tomorrow night. He believed I was asleep, ignorant, waiting to be robbed. He did not know I had his voice recorded, his intentions preserved word for word. He did not know that the moment he took that key, he handed me control. Lying there in the dark, I did not feel old. I felt focused. This was no longer about protecting my belongings. It was about protecting my daughter from a man who would burn everything around him to escape his own choices. Tomorrow, he would make his move, and tomorrow, he would learn that silence is not weakness. Sometimes, it is preparation. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale light slipped through the curtains and settled across the walls as if nothing in the world had changed. I moved through my routine slowly, deliberately, making sure every habit remained intact. Coffee brewed, toast browned. The house heard the same sounds it always had. If someone was watching, they would see nothing new. Inside, everything had shifted. As I sat at the kitchen table, I let my mind move backward through the last few weeks, replaying moments I had dismissed too quickly. What once felt like small inconsistencies now aligned into a single, uncomfortable truth. His job loss had never made sense. 8 years at the same place, stable by every account, then suddenly gone with no clear explanation. When I asked questions, the answers were vague, rehearsed. Market changes, office politics, bad timing. Each explanation delivered smoothly, never quite landing. Mail had started arriving addressed to him soon after they moved in. Envelopes he collected quickly, sometimes before I even noticed them. Financial language printed boldly across the front. Notices, reminders.
I had assumed it was part of reorganizing after a move. I had wanted to assume that. Phone calls came at odd hours. He always stepped outside to take them. When he returned, his energy changed, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. A man pretending calm while carrying something heavy. And then there were the questions.
Not just about locks and documents, but about my schedule. When I went to bed, when I woke up, which days I left the house, which days my daughter did. He asked as if making conversation, as if learning a new household. But he was building a map. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I had seen this before. Not in my home, but in other people's lives. In files and interviews and quiet rooms where truth eventually surfaced. For decades, my work had required me to recognize patterns before damage became irreversible. People lying rarely invent new behaviors. They repeat familiar ones, trusting others to overlook the gaps. I had not lost that ability. I had simply stopped expecting to need it. What hurt most was not the betrayal aimed at me. It was the betrayal aimed through me. My daughter's trust had been folded neatly into his plan, used as leverage, as camouflage. She believed she was part of a temporary hardship. In reality, she was standing between a desperate man and his consequences. I looked down the hallway toward the guest room where they slept. I imagined her waking beside him, unaware of the thoughts he carried, unaware that he had already chosen deception over honesty. That realization hardened something in me. I was no longer reacting to a threat. I was acting to prevent harm. By mid-morning, he appeared in the kitchen, relaxed, confident. He joked about coffee strength and commented on the weather. His ease confirmed what the recording already had. He believed the worst was behind him. He believed his plan was clean. I watched him carefully, noting how his eyes drifted toward the stairs, toward my room, toward the future he thought he had secured. That was when I made my decision. I would not confront him with words. Words could be twisted, denied, turned into arguments that would confuse my daughter and fracture her sense of reality. I would not call authorities without giving her the truth first. She deserved clarity, not chaos. What I needed was proof so undeniable that it would leave no room for doubt. And I needed him to reveal himself fully. The safest traps are the ones people walk into willingly. Throughout the day, I played my role. I complained lightly about fatigue. I mentioned my age in passing, leaning into the stereotype he already believed. I spoke about sleeping deeply, about routines I never changed. I let him feel secure. I watched confidence settle into him like armor. Inside, my mind worked quietly. Steps arranged, timing calculated, risk measured. This was not about revenge. It was about exposure, about allowing truth to arrive without distortion. By evening, I felt calm in a way that surprised me. Not numb, focused. Somewhere between dinner and nightfall, the balance of power shifted completely. He just did not know it yet. As I turned off the lights that night, I understood something I had not fully appreciated before. Experience does not disappear with age. It waits. And when it is needed, it remembers exactly what to do. Preparation requires patience, and patience requires silence. I did not rush. I did not improvise. Every step had to look ordinary to anyone who might be watching, while being exact enough to leave no room for error. The first thing I did was move the real key. I waited until the house was empty, until the echo of the front door closing faded completely. I stood in my bedroom,
and held the small piece of brass in my palm for a moment, feeling its familiar weight. It had opened the same lock for years without incident. Now, it represented leverage, not access. I placed it somewhere no one searching with confidence would ever look. Not hidden, not clever. Just buried among the meaningless things people ignore because they assume value announces itself. Then I closed that drawer and never looked at it again. Next came the decoy.
I chose something similar enough to be convincing but useless by design. A key that fit nothing important. I placed it where the real one had been, not carelessly, but with intention. Anyone who had searched before would recognize the spot instantly. Recognition breeds confidence. Confidence invites mistakes. Then I prepared the signal. I needed something that would mark intent unmistakably, something that could not be explained away as confusion or accident. I needed proof that required no interpretation. Something visual, immediate, unavoidable. The device itself was simple, nonviolent, precise. I tested it again and again until the trigger responded only to deliberate movement, not vibration, not curiosity. Only the action of someone reaching with purpose. Once installed, it disappeared into the background of my life, indistinguishable from the rest of the drawer's contents. Innocent, patient. Finally, I placed the recorder, small, hidden, positioned where it could see and hear without being seen. I adjusted the angle until the entire scene would be captured clearly. I tested the audio, the low light response, the activation timing. Everything functioned perfectly. Only then did I step back and take a breath. The room looked unchanged, familiar, safe. That was important. If anything felt off, suspicion might bloom. I needed him relaxed. Downstairs, life continued as if nothing were waiting in the dark. Dinner passed with forced normalcy. My daughter talked about plans for the week. He nodded, distracted, checking the time more often than necessary. I played my part, leaning into fatigue, letting my voice soften, my posture slacken just enough to confirm his expectations. I mentioned turning in early. I mentioned sleeping deeply. I mentioned medication that helped me rest. Each word landed exactly where I intended it to. His relief was subtle, but unmistakable. Later, he suggested a drink. A casual offer. Too casual. I declined without hesitation, blaming routine, health, age. He pressed lightly, then backed off, satisfied with my final mention of sleep aids. He did not need me unconscious. He only needed me predictable. I went upstairs first. In my room, I made a show of preparation. Changed clothes, turned down the bed, switched off the lamp. Then I sat in the dark and watched the faint outline of the door. Time slowed. Every sound downstairs sharpened my awareness. Footsteps, a chair scraping softly, the murmur of a television turned low. Then silence again. I checked the recorder one last time. Everything was ready. What surprised me most was not fear, but calm. The kind that arrives when you know the outcome no longer depends on chance. He believed he was entering a controlled environment. In reality, he was stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written. I lay back and steadied my breathing, letting it fall into the rhythm of sleep. Real enough to convince, controlled enough to respond. Minutes passed, then hours. I thought of my daughter, of how easily trust can be reshaped into blindness, of how often kindness is mistaken for weakness. I thought of all the times I had been overlooked because of my age, my quiet, my unwillingness to assert dominance. Tonight, those assumptions would work in my favor. The house shifted as night deepened. Pipes clicked softly. A distant car passed. Then, at last, the sound I had been waiting for. A step on the stairs. Careful. Intentional. The trap was set, and whoever chose to cross the final line would do so believing they were invisible. They were about to learn how wrong that belief could be. The sound came just after the hour when even the house seems to forget itself. A soft creak on the staircase. A pause. Then another step. Slow, measured, confident in its caution. I kept my breathing even, shallow enough to suggest sleep, deep enough to sell it. Years ago, I had learned how easily people believed what they wanted to believe. Tonight was no different. The door to my room moved almost imperceptibly. Not a push, not a pull, just enough to create space. He stood there for a long moment. I could feel it without opening my eyes. That familiar sensation of being watched, weighed, assessed. He was making absolutely sure that I was no longer a factor. Satisfied, he stepped inside. His movements were quiet now, stripped of hesitation. This was the version of him he never showed my daughter, the one who believed planning made him superior. He moved directly toward the dresser without looking anywhere else, proof that this was not curiosity, but intention. The drawer slid open. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the room exploded into sound and motion. A sharp burst cut through the silence, followed by a sudden, unmistakable cascade. The air filled with movement. Light caught on thousands of tiny particles as they spread outward in a violent shimmer. He stumbled back with a strangled gasp. Silver and gold clung to him instantly. Hair, shoulders, hands, face. Every frantic movement only embedded it deeper, transforming panic into spectacle. "What the hell?" His whisper broke into a shout as he slapped at his clothes, scattering more proof across the floor. He looked down at himself, disbelief fighting with terror, as realization struck. I chose that moment to sit up. The bedside lamp clicked on, flooding the room with light. He froze. There he stood, beside my open drawer, covered head to toe in glittering evidence, a useless key clenched tightly in his shaking hand. His eyes met mine, wide and trapped, like an animal caught mid-act. "What is going on in here?" My voice sounded calm, confused, perfectly controlled. The sound of hurried footsteps thundered down the hallway. My daughter appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, fear already rising in her eyes. She took in the scene in a single glance. The open drawer, the device, the man she married standing in my room at an hour meant for sleep, sparkling like guilt made visible. Her breath caught. "Why are you in his bedroom?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I heard a noise," he said weakly. She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the drawer, on the floor, on the unmistakable reality of what she was seeing. "A noise," she repeated. "And that led you to open my father's dresser." Silence filled the space between them. Glitter continued to fall with every movement he made, evidence drifting down slowly, refusing to disappear. I stayed seated on the bed, hands visible, posture non-threatening. This was not my confrontation to lead. This was hers. She took a step closer to him, not in anger, in disbelief. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly. "What were you doing in here?" His confidence was gone now, stripped away in seconds. He looked smaller somehow, exposed, ridiculous, and dangerous all at once. "I thought he needed help," he said. "Help with what?" He swallowed. His eyes darted to me, then back to her. I let the silence stretch. In that space, denial collapsed under the weight of what could no longer be explained. And as she stood there, seeing the man she trusted reduced to glitter and lies, I knew the moment had arrived. The trap had done its job. Now the truth would have to finish it. I reached for my phone, slowly, deliberately, making sure neither of them felt threatened by the movement. My daughter's eyes followed my hand, confusion giving way to something heavier. Instinct. The kind that knows when truth is about to surface, whether you are ready for it or not. "There is something you need to hear," I said quietly. He reacted instantly. "No," he said, too fast. "You do not need to listen to this, whatever he thinks he has." My daughter raised her hand without looking at him. "Stop." Her voice did not shake. That frightened him more than shouting ever could. "Dad, play it?" I pressed the screen. His voice filled the room, clear, unfiltered, unmistakable. "Yeah, it is me. Everyone is asleep." My daughter froze. "The old man has more than he lets on. Accounts, documents, real money. This will solve everything." Her face drained of color. She turned slowly toward her husband, as if trying to reconcile the voice with the man standing in front of her. "Tomorrow night works. She will be gone. Gives me time to clear it, and we leave." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Stop it," he whispered, stepping forward. She did not move. Her eyes stayed locked on him while the recording continued. He will not notice until it is too late. He misplaces things. She will cover for me without knowing it. A sound escaped her throat, something between disbelief and grief. Then came the part that shattered what little was left. "I do not have a choice. The debt is bad. Gambling does not forgive mistakes." Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, staring at him like a stranger who had borrowed a familiar face. "Gambling," she whispered. "You told me it was just a rough patch." The recording ended. Silence followed. Not the kind that waits to be filled, the kind that refuses to move. She looked at him again. Tears welled, but did not fall. "You planned to rob my father," she said slowly. "You planned to lie to me and take me away so I would not see it." He tried to speak. Words came out tangled, desperate. "I was trying to protect you." "He does not need it. He has more than enough." That was when she stepped forward fully. "Do not talk about him like that," she said. Her voice was steady now, cold. "You do not get to decide what he needs. You do not get to use me to destroy the man who raised me." She turned to me. "How long have you known?" "Since the night before last," I answered. "I wanted you to hear it from him, not from an argument." She nodded once, absorbing that. Then she faced him again. "How much do you owe?" "It does not matter how much." He hesitated too long. "Enough that you planned a felony," she said. "Enough that you are willing to risk my father and my future." His shoulders dropped. She exhaled slowly, then pointed toward the hallway. "Get out." He laughed bitterly. "You cannot just throw me out. We are married." "You ended that," she said, "when you chose theft over truth. When you called my father weak and thought age made him disposable." He looked at me, then hatred flashing across his face. "You planned this?" "No," she said before I could answer. "You did." She stood taller now, something resolute settling into her posture.
"Pack what you brought. Leave the key. Do not contact me again. My lawyer will contact yours."
He stood there, glitter still clinging to him like mockery, refusing to let go. "This is not over," he muttered.
"It is," she replied, "and you know it."
He left without another word, his footsteps heavy, uneven, dragging evidence through the house with him. The front door closed with finality. My daughter sank into the chair beside my bed. The fight left her all at once. Tears came freely now, quiet and exhausted.
"I am so sorry," she said. "I did not see it."
"You were not supposed to," I replied. "That was the point." She nodded, wiping her face.
"Thank you for protecting me."
I looked around the room at the mess, the device the truth exposed so suddenly. "Sometimes protection does not look like force," I said. "Sometimes it looks like patience." Outside, the house settled again, but this time the silence felt different, cleaner, honest. The house felt different the morning after he left. Not quieter exactly, but lighter, as if something corrosive had been removed from the air. Sunlight moved freely through the rooms again, touching surfaces that had carried tension for weeks. I stood in the kitchen making coffee and realized my hands were no longer clenched. My daughter came downstairs slowly, as if unsure whether the ground beneath her was stable yet. She looked older somehow, not weaker, clearer. She did not apologize again. She did not need to. Instead, she sat across from me at the table where everything had begun and wrapped both hands around her mug, grounding herself in something real. "I do not know how I missed it," she said quietly. "You missed it because you trusted him," I replied. "Trust is not a flaw." She nodded, absorbing that, then looked up. "But silence can be dangerous too." "Yes," I said. "It can. But so can noise." Over the following weeks, life began to reassemble itself piece by piece. She took time off to think, to breathe, to untangle the version of reality she had been living inside. The legal consequences unfolded in the background without drama. When lies collapse under their own weight, there is rarely much left to fight with. He did not come back. He did not call. People who depend on deception rarely return to places where truth lives openly. My daughter found work that felt steady and honest, not glamorous, not rushed, something that allowed her to rebuild confidence without pressure. I watched her reclaim her routines, her laughter returning slowly but genuinely. As for me, I returned the house to itself. The device was removed, the drawer restored, the room reclaimed. Nothing about my life changed outwardly, yet everything had shifted internally. I moved with the same habits, but with sharper awareness. Not suspicion, awareness. What stayed with me most was not the betrayal itself, but the assumption behind it. That age meant confusion, that quiet meant weakness, that patience meant ignorance. Those beliefs are dangerous because they invite people to act without conscience. They convince the reckless that experience has an expiration date. It does not. I have lived long enough to understand that strength evolves. When you are young, it is loud, physical, immediate. As years pass, it becomes strategic, observant, controlled. It learns when not to speak and when to wait. That night did not end with shouting or violence. It ended with exposure, with truth delivered intact and undeniable. That mattered more than punishment ever could.
My personal lesson from all of this is simple and earned. Do not underestimate the quiet ones. Do not mistake routine for blindness. And never assume kindness is the same as naivety. Family is not defined by proximity or titles. It is defined by protection, by the choices you make when someone you love is at risk. I protected my daughter not by confronting danger head-on, but by allowing it to reveal itself. That is a kind of strength that does not fade with age. It sharpens. And if there is one truth I carry forward now, it is this. Sometimes justice does not shout. Sometimes it waits patiently in the dark until the truth walks straight into the light.